Up to this point, Robert Maudsley, aged 69, has endured over 4 decades confined within a unique subterranean cell within Wakefield Prison, informally referred to as the Monster Mansion. Within these confines, he serves a life sentence for the murder of 4 individuals, with the unsettling fact that 3 of his victims were former cellmates. Nevertheless, those who are familiar with him, including friends and family, consistently depict Robert as a person of gentleness, kindness, and remarkable intellect. To illustrate, his IQ stands at a level considered genius, and he possesses a deep appreciation for poetry, art, and classical music. Robert John Maudsley came into the world in Liverpool in 1953. However, when he was a mere 6 months old, he, along with his older brothers Kevin and Paul, as well as his sister Brenda, was entrusted to the care of Nazareth House Children's Home in Crosby. This arrangement stemmed from the parents' inability to manage the responsibilities associated with raising such a large brood. Consequently, social services placed the children in a Catholic orphanage, where they received care under the watchful eye of nuns. 9 years elapsed before the children's parents, George and Jen Maudsley, who were residing in Toxteth with their 5th child, they would eventually have 7 more children, managed to stabilize their circumstances and expressed a desire to reunite with their sons. This marked the onset of the most challenging phase in the childhood of Robert and his brother, as their parents subjected them to ceaseless punishments, degradation, and verbal abuse. These experiences left an indelible mark on the boy's psyche. Reflecting on his upbringing, Maudsley once recounted, "All I can recollect from my childhood are the relentless beating. I was once confined to a room for 6 interminable months. My father would only open that door to enter and inflict brutal punishments on me 5 to 6 times a day, employing a rod, a belt, and even worse. Unfortunately, on this occasion, social services arrived too late. After a year had passed, they finally intervened, removing Robert from his family's custody when he was 10 years old and placing him with foster parents. Life with his new caregivers brought Robert a sense of contentment, yet the profound damage inflicted by his biological parents remained insurmountable. Consequently, at the age of 16, Maudsley decided to leave and embarked on a journey to London. Upon arriving in the bustling capital, Robert became ensnared in a turbulent existence, descending into substance abuse involving alcohol and drugs. Wrestling with severe bouts of depression, he made 2 harrowing attempts at suicide, only to be rescued both times from the brink. Consequently, the young man found himself admitted to a psychiatric hospital, where he confided in doctors about hearing voices that compelled him to commit matricide and patricide. Following his treatment, Maudsley chose not to return to his foster family, but instead opted to remain in London, earning a living on the streets. One fateful night in 1974, while Robert was on the streets seeking clients, he encountered John Farrell, a simple handyman. As they conversed during their encounter, Farrell decided to share explicit images depicting the abuse of children with Maudsley. Perhaps triggered by these images, which stirred memories of his own harrowing childhood experiences, Robert committed an even graver crime. He took the life of another man. Maudsley exhibited no inclination to evade justice. He willingly turned himself in to the authorities the very next day. Subsequently, a court convened, and the 21-year-old was deemed mentally unfit, leading to his placement in the high-security Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital. Over the course of the next 3 years spent at the institution, the hospital staff provided predominantly favorable reports about Robert. In fact, if not for an incident in 1977, there might have been consideration for his release. The incident in question arose when one of the hospital's patients confessed to Maudsley the day before about committing heinous acts against a child. Robert's moral principles compelled him to take action. Alongside David Cheeseman, another individual undergoing treatment at Broadmoor, they escorted the man to a cell and engaged in a brutal altercation, resulting in the man's demise. In this instance, the court determined Maudsley to be mentally competent to face trial, and he was subsequently convicted of manslaughter, leading to his incarceration at Wakefield Prison. It was during this period that the moniker the Brain Eater became associated with him, fueled by sensational newspaper reports that suggested he had a peculiar fondness for consuming this macabre delicacy. However, the circulation of a later autopsy report on the victim dispelled this gruesome rumor, but the ominous nickname stuck. Just a mere few weeks after his arrival at Wakefield Prison, Maudsley once again made headlines in the crime chronicles of newspapers, committing another set of killings, this time claiming 2 lives. On a Saturday morning in 1978, Maudsley lured Salney Durwood, a fellow prisoner serving time for the murder of his wife, into his cell. Swiftly and ruthlessly, he ended Durwood's life and concealed the body beneath his bed. Subsequently, he attempted to entice other inmates into his cell using various excuses, but none would oblige. Frustrated, Robert entered Bill Roberts' cell, wielding a makeshift knife, and within moments extinguished Roberts' life. Following the double homicide, Maudsley calmly approached a prison guard and handed over the blood-stained knife, uttering with chilling composure, "You'll be short 2 people at the next roll call." During his 1979 trial, where he faced charges related to these final murders, Robert openly acknowledged that he had envisioned his parents in the place of his victims. His defense attorney argued that the crimes were the tragic outcome of repressed childhood aggression stemming from relentless abuse. "When I commit these acts, I envision my parents in place of my victims. Their faces are the only ones I see before me. If I had taken their lives in 1970, none of these people would have suffered. I would have been free and at peace," revealed Robert Maudsley in an interview. Subsequently, he was found guilty of both murders and received a life sentence in Wakefield. Later, Home Secretary Michael Howard determined that Maudsley should never be granted parole, ensuring his permanent incarceration. Since the day of his final murder, Robert Maudsley has endured over 4 decades of solitary confinement, spending 23 out of every 24 hours isolated. During his limited 1-hour strolls, he is accompanied by 6 guards. "The prison authorities view me as a dilemma. For them, it's simpler to confine me in isolation, lock the door, and entomb me in a concrete coffin. I am left to wither and deteriorate," lamented Robert in a letter to a newspaper. In 1983, a custom-designed cell was constructed for Maudsley within Wakefield Prison, measuring 5.5 by 4.5 meters. This cell essentially comprises 2 rooms, featuring bulletproof plexiglass windows, and is perpetually monitored by a team of prison guards. Interestingly, this cell bears a remarkable resemblance to the one later depicted in The Silence of the Lambs, even though it was built 7 years prior to the film's release. It's worth noting that the creators of the movie openly acknowledged that Robert John Maudsley served as the inspiration for the main character, portrayed brilliantly by Anthony Hopkins. Accessing this heavily fortified chamber requires navigating through a labyrinth of 17 locked steel doors. Notably, the sole furnishings in Maudsley's cell consist of a cardboard table and chair. The toilet and sink are intentionally secured to the floor, while his bed is a plain concrete slab topped with a mattress. It's worth noting that the record for the longest period spent in solitary confinement was held by Albert Woodfox, who endured nearly continuous isolation in a 2-by-3-meter cage for 43 years, before his release from a Louisiana prison in 2016. In the year 2000, Robert Maudsley filed a petition requesting permission to acquire a cyanide pill because he could not bear the prospect of spending the remainder of his life in solitary confinement. His plea for suicide application was brought before Judge Morris Kay at Liverpool High Court. Following a comprehensive 5-day hearing, Robert's request was ultimately denied. Subsequently, Maudsley penned a letter to the newspaper, inquiring, "What purpose is served by confining me to my cell for 23 hours a day? Why invest in feeding me and allocate resources to it, only to grant me 1 hour of freedom each day? Who do I truly pose a threat to? Given my present circumstances, it seems the only conceivable outcomes are psychological deterioration, the onset of mental illness, or impending suicide. Why can't I have a companion like a pet parrot instead of the flies, cockroaches, and spiders that currently inhabit my cell? I pledge to care for it and not consume it. Why am I deprived of a television in my cell to observe the world and learn? Why am I not allowed access to music cassettes to indulge in my favorite classical compositions? Should the prison authorities persistently deny these requests, that I earnestly request the provision of a potassium cyanide capsule, which I will willingly accept. With that, the predicament known as Robert John Maudsley will be promptly and effortlessly resolved."